Let's also put the sensitivity up by pressing this shoulder button, and you hear it does 3 beeps, so we're at full speed now. And look at that thing go. Eachine are a well-known company in the RC industry, and their products are getting better and better. The Wizard 220 is of course one of them, very well respected and at a great price. We are now in direct contact with Eachine, and they've sent us the new E33 for review. It's a budget quad with potential, and links to it are in the video description. Finally, as always, please click that subscribe button. These reviews take a long time to film, edit and publish, and the only driver for doing so is your support. So if you don't subscribe, we feel that we're doing something wrong. Please enjoy the review and be sure to post comments below whilst watching. So sent to us directly by Eachine, and it's great to be working with them on a new partnership, is this new model. It's called the E33C, and it's basically a very easy, good beginner's quadcopter. If we just look at the box, there are some different models available. You'll see that there is a 33, a 33C and a 33W. And that denotes the different ways in which you can get this form factor. So the C comes with the camera, which is the one that we've got. The W comes with a camera, but also has Wi-Fi connectivity, so I guess you then get a live stream whilst you're flying. But most of us reviewers hate those live app stream type budget quadcopters, so I'm quite pleased actually to get one with a transmitter. So let's unbox it and have a look at what's inside. And there it is. Now, my first reaction is that, blimey, that looks like a Hubsan. It does remind me of the little Hubsan 501 and 502 models. Very similar shape and style. Really, really lightweight, but overall quite a nice feeling little quad. Very smooth, silky feeling to that. So that's the quadcopter, and then we've got a transmitter in the box as well. And it's got a lot of buttons. I noticed as well, actually, it doesn't have a spring-loaded throttle. So that suggests possibly this doesn't have altitude hold, but we'll have a look into that later. We've also got a bag of goodies, and let's have a very quick look at what's in there. So we've got spare props, looks like we've got only 4. We've got some prop guards, which is great for beginners when you're flying indoors. USB charger. We've got some additional little nose cones, which go on the top of the props. A little bit pointless, I think they're for show only. Got a tiny little camera module as well, and we'll have a closer look at that later. And then we've got some feet. So these are to go on the underside of the quadcopter and to raise the quad off the ground. So if you're flying on longer grass, they might be quite useful. So we'll start with a closer look at this little drone. Now remember, the entire package is only about £35 or about $40 for this specific model, so don't expect premium quality, but it doesn't feel bad. The finish to it on the body is a very smooth, really nicely moulded piece of plastic. It's all one piece as well, so the arms, etc. wouldn't be able to be replaced, but it feels quite solid. It feels like if you did have a crash, it might survive, and of course with the prop guards, that's going to help as well. Got some fairly large, very high-pitched props here as well, and there are little nose cones on the end which come off. And if you take those nose cones off, you can then access a little screw that you would be using to replace those props as well, so nice and easy to replace. The motors inside here as well are brushed, and you can actually, as you rotate the prop, feel the rotation of the gears inside it, and you can see there are just some tiny little brushed motors just about visible inside there as well. Then looking underneath the drone, we've got some semi-translucent underarm elements, and it looks like these might light up when we power up the drone. We've also got the 4 little ports into which the ground legs will stick if you are flying this in longer grass. And then there's a battery bay here as well, with one of those annoying little screws that we have to undo to get into it. Then behind that there's the power on and off switch, and then a tiny little accessory port into which I'm guessing that little camera module attaches. So what we're going to do first is just unscrew the battery bay. You do get a screwdriver in the accessory bag as well, so that's quite nice. And that just slides back and then lifts off, and I'm expecting, yep, there it is, a little battery inside. The battery is a 1-cell 380 milliamps, so tiny little battery, which is probably going to give us about 6 minutes flight time, I would expect with this, maybe 5 minutes. And it's using a JST connector, so I'm just going to plug that in now to the drone. It comes disconnected, which is good. And with that now plugged in, I can now sit it back in place and close that little hatch. So we'll put now that tiny little screw back in place. It's not really necessary. I mean, the battery hatch shuts nice and securely, so it doesn't really need to be sealed shut again with that screw. So with that now in place, we can turn the drone on and look at the lights. Oh, look at that. So we've got blue on the front, red on the back, and they're flashing at the moment, probably waiting to be bound with the transmitter. So yeah, really nice looking drone. I think that's going to look quite nice actually, flying it at night. So what we're going to do next now is just have a very quick look at that camera module. So the camera module is a separate accessory, but it does come with this specific model of the drone. It's got a tiny little accessory cable which you connect into the back of the drone itself to give this unit power. And it has a tiny little lens on the front. Now it's a 2 megapixel camera, so it'll be interesting to see the quality of the video and the photos that we get out of the drone. Just on the side of that camera module is a small SD card slot as well. So we can put an SD card in there and then we can start and stop the recording from the transmitter. And this is the big difference really between this model and the other model. This model, the C, doesn't have the Wi-Fi module as part of this camera. So you are just going to be able to record photos and videos with this. You're not necessarily going to be able to see any live stream because it doesn't have the app capability. In terms of tilt, the camera does tilt a tiny little bit, but not a lot. So that's its neutral position and it tilts down that much. Seems to be constrained by the ribbon cable inside here. So don't try and over tilt that because you will rip that cable off. So basically you're going to have facing forward sort of shots or slightly down, which is probably sufficient for most. So we'll get this connected to the drone now. So on the underside of the drone are 2 little plastic brackets which you use to mount the camera. The camera module has 2 little brackets underneath as well. So all you need to do is position those just before the brackets and then very gently slide the whole module forwards, and that then mounts the camera on the underside of the drone. This is also of course where the legs that you get as part of the accessories come into play, because the legs are going to keep the camera away from the ground. Now there are little screws in there as well, so you basically attach the legs like that and then you put a screw through there as well using the included screwdriver to keep them in place. And it's quite funny actually, with those legs in place it looks like more of a drone than just a budget quadcopter. So I would actually put those on, although do bear in mind that that additional weight is going to very slightly reduce your flight time, but at least the quadcopter and the camera is now a little bit more protected if you're flying in longer grass. The final step then of course is to plug the camera into the accessory port. Now make sure you get the pins aligned correctly on that, otherwise you'll damage those pins and you're going to not be able to use it at all. It's quite fragile, these little ports, but plug that in like that. And there we go, the camera is now attached to the drone. So if we power this all back up, we should now see some lights within that little camera module. Yep, there's a little red LED there to show that there's actually power going to it. And that's now basically ready to go. Of course, last step is to put an SD card into the slot on the camera, and we'll do that before the test flight, which is next. But just before the test flight, we'll have a very quick look at the transmitter that comes with it. So it's a 2.4 gig sort of Wi-Fi orientated transmitter. You should probably get about 50 meters range, maybe 100 meters with this actually. And we've got various buttons on here. So let's run through those buttons now. So obviously we've got our throttle and our yaw. And I noted earlier that the throttle is not spring loaded. So I don't think this is going to have altitude hold, but I will check that during the test flight. On the right hand side, obviously we've got our pitch and roll, which is spring loaded as well, so it's set up for mode 2. Now the pitch and roll button also presses down, and doing so enables and disables headless mode, but as everybody knows, I hate headless mode on these cheap quads. If you don't have a GPS in it, headless mode is a little bit pointless. If you're unsure about why that is, comment below and I'll certainly be more than happy to answer it. We've then got the buttons on the right hand side here, these 4 buttons. They trim the quadcopter, so if we feel it drifting forwards or drifting left or right, we can use these trims to basically correct that and improve the hover. And that's probably important on this drone because there doesn't seem to be any calibration for the gyros or accelerometers either. And then finally on the right hand side we've got another 4 buttons. The button on the left hand side apparently controls the lights. The button on the top controls the video start and stop, or the photos perhaps, and there is no explanation for the other buttons, so I'm not sure what they do, if anything. Finally, on the top, we've got 2 trigger buttons as well. The trigger button on the left-hand side is for our sensitivity. So in other words, the speed of the quadcopter. So each press of that will toggle between 3 different speed modes. We've then got a stunt button on the right-hand side. So pressing that lets us do flips and things like that. Well, that's about it really, other than putting batteries in here. It takes 4 AA batteries like these. So I'm gonna get those installed and then we're gonna go out for the flight test. So unlike as usual, where we have horrible weather in the UK, yeah, it's a bit gloomy today, but at least it's not raining and there is not a single bit of wind. It's perfect. So here we've got the little E33C drone, and now I didn't have time to fully charge the battery, and so I've actually used a 1S 600 milliamp battery. That's the nice thing about this drone, it doesn't use a proprietary battery, and so because of that we can buy these very, very cheaply. I've linked to these actual ones in the video description. I think they're about £4 each, so you can keep this drone flying for quite some time very cheaply. It's a bit of a squash to get it in the battery bay, but gets there in the end. So we'll now slide the camera in there as well, like that. There we go. Tilt the camera down a tiny little bit so we've got a nice downward view, and turn it on. There we go, the lights start blinking. Now this camera attachment is a little bit fiddly. So yeah, that was a bit better. No, not quite there. The pins on the camera seem to easily bend down. So just make sure you get it properly aligned before you slide it forward. There we go, that's much better. Now I've got an SD card in there. You see we've got the green light there. With the transmitter on, throttle to 0 to max and then back to 0 again. And that's our kind of calibration routine. Now it wasn't very obvious earlier when we didn't have an SD card in there, but with the SD card now installed, the little green light, which hopefully you can see on the underside, manual doesn't say it, but pressing down starts and stops video. And you can see that that's now flashing red. Press it again, it stops recording video. Press the up button on the transmitter once, that takes a photo. So it wasn't very clear in the manual. It actually doesn't talk about the down action on that at all, but oh well. Okay, so let's get this thing in the air. But before doing so, first thing I like to always do is to see what's going to happen in the event of a loss of signal from the transmitter. So I'm just going to fire up the motors. Be very careful when you're doing this so you don't chop your hands. And then I'm going to turn off the transmitter. Let's see what it does. Lights have started flashing underneath, the props are still going. Now I'd expect it to cut off by this point. Bit of a worry actually that it hasn't. Now this is what you call basically a fail-safe, and it's a bit of a worry because it would appear that this drone doesn't have. Okay, yeah, fair enough. So the motors have now stopped, and that took quite a bit of time. So it does have a fail-safe, but it looks like it takes a while for it to engage. Anyway, at least we know that the motors are going to cut and it's not just going to sail off into the distance. So let's get it in the air. Turn the transmitter back on. Throttle up to full and then back down, and up we go. Hey, so we're in the air. Now remember, this drone does not have altitude hold, and therefore for that reason you are going to be constantly active on the accelerator or on the throttle. Not a big problem. It does make you a bit lazy altitude hold with a lot of these cheap budget drones. This one you're actually going to have to learn to fly, which is not a bad thing, you know. A lot of these new technologies mean that we don't have to be such good pilots anymore with RC aircraft. That's not necessarily a good thing. So I've now trimmed it out using these buttons on the transmitter, which means that I can take my hands off the controls and it's hovering pretty well now actually. So I'm giving no control inputs at all at the moment. And it's going very nicely, very smooth. We're on the first sensitivity setting at the moment. Now let's just try a roll because I'm quite excited to try this. So I'm going to hit the trigger button on the transmitter and then press a direction. Hey, it looks a little bit clumsy when it's doing it because it is quite big for doing flips, but let's try it again. Not too bad actually. We'll fly some little circles around ourselves. Now remember, when you do go into forward flight, it's not going to hold its altitude. So if you do pitch forwards, you need to give it some throttle. But This is beginner mode, and that's flying really quickly actually. Flies very, very well. Now, one thing I forgot to do is start video, so I'm just going to do that quickly now by pressing down. Okay, the lights, blue lights on the front of the drone gave us a little flash when I did that as well. So I'll put the on-screen video on now, and let's take it easy and go for some smooth flying to see what the video looks like, and we'll take it up a bit higher as well. Nice range here, no problems at the moment, still in full control of it. Hopefully you're getting some good video. It's a 2 megapixel camera. I think that would give us 720p at least. So that's some nice forward motion. Remember, it's got no gimbal, no image stabilization this, and we're at quite some altitude right now. So hopefully that looks nice from up there. I'm going to start bringing it down a bit now. Now that was interesting. Now I dumped the throttle there to descend, and I forgot that, of course, this is a variable throttle, and therefore for that reason, if you drop the throttle completely, the prop stops spinning, and therefore it loses its stability in the air. So a bit of advice there, when you're flying this up high and you want to come down, make sure that you first of all don't put the throttle to absolutely zero, otherwise that will happen. So not having altitude hold does have a few implications for pilots that won't be used to that. All you need to do is bear those in mind when you fly it. Back up into the air. Going to start recording again. Okay, taking a photo now. And some more video. So let's hope that video is coming out nice and clearly. Let's also put the sensitivity up by pressing this shoulder button, and you hear it does 3 beeps, so we're at full speed now. And look at that thing go. Now, I think in some respects, this thing lets you fly faster than it can actually cope with. And the reason I say that is because if I give it full pitch forwards and then try and punch up, so give it full throttle, then kind of doesn't have enough power to lift it up from the ground. So it does fly very well. I mean, look at the speed now. But you saw there, it dropped in a lot of altitude and I couldn't give it any more throttle because I was at max. So I would recommend not using that third sensitivity mode. It doesn't have enough power because of the 1S battery. It's only one cell. Although, to be fair, I think we're coming up to the end of flight time by now, so that could be why as well the power's dipped a bit. But I'm just going to stop recording now. There we go. And just let's see if we can do, again, a bit of smooth. Let's see if this is usable as a camera drone. So we'll try for just some smoother video footage. Let's see how it looks. So I'm just letting it drift towards that tree at the moment. Just see if the video's usable, really. That should look quite nice. Range seems to be good. I think it's dropped out possibly once so far, but not too bad. So I'll stop recording now. I think we're coming probably to the end of our flight time with that battery now. I mean, in general, I would say that this is not good for a complete beginner, but I would say it's good for a beginner who wants to progress beyond using altitude hold, and a beginner that wants more of a challenge, because, you know, drones such as the Visuo 809 that we reviewed a few reviews ago really does help you to fly because it's got altitude hold, so you really don't need to do a lot to keep it in the air. This one's got variable throttle, and that means, of course, you've got to fly it, else you're going to just hit the ground. But in terms of, you know, for £35, I think it was, or less than £30, it's not bad at all. It's a bit more of a handful. You need to control it. It doesn't fly itself, but if that's what you want to progress your flying skills, then it's not a bad thing. So we've got flashing lights on the bottom. That must mean our battery is almost flat. So I'm going to land it. Of course, it doesn't have altitude hold, so there's no auto landing with this one. Not the most graceful way to land ever, but we're on the ground and we're still in one piece. Overall, this is a budget quad, but it's a good one. There are some issues with regards to failsafe, however, and so fly it in a spacious open area and keep it within range, or of course fly indoors. For learning to fly a quadcopter properly without altitude hold, this is a really good drone to start with. I've listed some of the positives and negatives on the screen now, so please do take a look. The E33C is available from many different outlets, so check our links in the video description to find the best price. And finally, all we ask in return is that you hit that subscribe button, and perhaps if you do, we might be able to talk Eachine into helping us with some giveaways. Give this video a thumbs up and we'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop us some comments below as well. Thanks for watching.